Hello, and welcome to Centennial College's MCMC 705. This is the Collections Management class. My name is Stephanie Allen, and I'm your instructor for this term for Collections Management. This course will be held on Fridays beginning September 6th until December 13th, and our class time is 3:30 p.m. until 6:20 p.m. The first two classes are going to be asynchronous, as you've probably already noticed. I am traveling for work. Right now, I'm in Chicago at the Field Museum. We are deinstalling an exhibition that's going to be going on to another venue. So I am unfortunately not able to be in class with you all for the first 2 weeks. But I will have an office hour in the second week, and you can drop in and say hello. You can ask any questions. You will have had a chance to review all the assignments. And so if you have any questions about those, that would be fine. Or just if you want to talk museums, I'm always happy. I'd like to start off the class, and I start off every class with a land acknowledgement. And the land acknowledgement at Centennial College is, as you see written here. You may be from a different place. And so I encourage you to go and review the land acknowledgement for your area and to consider the peoples who were in that space before settlers arrived. Centennial College is proud to be part of a rich history of education in this province and in this city. We acknowledge that we're on the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and pay tribute to their legacy and the legacy of all First Peoples of Canada, as we strengthen ties with communities we serve and build the future through learning and through our graduates. Today, the traditional meeting place of Toronto is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work in the communities that have grown in the treaty lands of the Mississaugas. We acknowledge that we are all treaty people and accept our responsibility to honor all our relations. Locating ourselves is an important way that we honor the land and recognize the history of violence and displacement for diverse Indigenous peoples. I encourage you to take some time to investigate the nations and peoples of the traditional lands where you are from. I believe I added that last part. I don't think that's the official Centennial College. So just do take a moment. I won't read this at the beginning of every class. I will pause and give everyone a moment to reflect. Administration. I start every class in a very similar way, where I go through the administration, any news, any updates. I open the floor to you to provide any updates or news for your colleagues. That can be anything related to another class. It can be something related to a field trip that you're working on. It can be some interesting news story that you heard that's related to the program. So today I'll start off the administration by going through some housekeeping. So as I said, classes are 3 hours. They're in person usually. The first two, as I said, are not, but ordinarily I do try to have the classes in person. I encourage you to bring your devices to class because you might hear a term or think, hey, there's something that I wanted to look up. And so I encourage you to do that. Just be respectful of those around you and to whoever, to your instructor or whatever guest lecturer we might have. So just be respectful and mindful. One of the other things I ask is that you put your headshot on eCentennial. And I do this because I really want to learn your names. And this is a really big class. This is the largest class I've ever taught. So if you put your headshot in eCentennial, that will make it really much easier for me to learn your name. And so that would be helpful. So please don't use an avatar or anything like that. I want to learn your names. So I'll refer to eCentennial a lot. Some instructors call it the course shell. I think ultimately we're all talking about the same place, which is a virtual classroom. It's where I will post all of the PowerPoint lecture or all of the PowerPoint presentations that I give. It's where I will post any news, any handouts, anything like that. So please do check in on it regularly. Certainly check in on it before class. I've put the link here, but you'll also find it in your eCentennial with all of your other classes. Now, I've left this note in here. I've actually deleted the Brightspace Pulse app off of my phone, but there is an app, at least for the iPhone, and it's called Brightspace Pulse for eCentennial. If you're an app gadget person, you might want to download it and have all of your calendars synchronized or something. Anyway, I just leave that for you. Housekeeping. So furthering with the housekeeping, I will keep a regular office hour. It will be held over Zoom. And I haven't seen your course schedule yet, so I'm not sure when you have any gaps. I'm proposing Tuesdays at 1 p.m. because usually in my day job, that is a free time for me. So hopefully you don't have any classes then and we can make Tuesday at 1 o'clock work. Now, the purpose of the office hour is to give you an opportunity to ask any questions that you aren't, that come up outside of class or that you're too shy to ask in class. Now, that said, I do hope that you find it within you to ask the question in class, because if you have the question, chances are someone else does too. But I can go through assignments, I can answer questions. Sometimes we just talk about the latest museum news or, even museum philosophy. So anything that you want to talk about, I will be at your disposal for that hour. So our first in-person class, I will go through that, some proposed times. So hopefully someone, if you're watching this, you can send me your timetable. I haven't had a chance to connect with the other instructors yet this year. More housekeeping. For the classes, I know you guys are all Zoom pros, but I just want to go through the etiquette again. Mute your microphone unless you're speaking. Cameras aren't required, but they are preferred. And I will go so far as to say they're mandatory if you are presenting something. And if we have a guest lecturer over Zoom, it's always nice if they can see faces. So that would be nice. I just want to remind you that the chat box, you can either send to the group or you can send it to individuals. So just be mindful of that. Again, I know you guys are all Zoom pros this far, after the pandemic, but just a reminder. And just access technology, for anything that is on Zoom, you'll probably have a better chance in engaging with the content if you're looking at it on a computer rather than just on your phone. As a matter of course, I record all Zoom classes. That my Zoom is set that it just defaults to recording. So I will record those and share those with the group, any Zoom classes that we do. Attendance. So generally, again, it's weird with me not being there for the first two classes, but I will circulate an attendance sheet. The college does keep track of attendance. More or less, it's related to add drop and certain administrative things. So I will send around an attendance sheet. As I say, I don't have a grade for attendance, but I do want to point out that there is a clear corollary between attendance and success. And there's a train going by just outside. I'm in Chicago right now, so it's a little loud. The other thing about the attendance sheet that I like is it gives me an opportunity where you can put in your preferred name and your preferred pronouns. And then that way I get it in writing and I try to make that correlation to your individual headshots. And I try to learn all of this information about you. And here I go. Next point is, please be patient as I try to learn your names. Again, it's a really big group this year. And I have a hard time with names at the best of times. So adding your photo to eCentennial will really be helpful. And in there, you can also add your pronouns. And I think you can put your preferred name in as well. I just want to remind you that there will be a number of statutory holidays. They won't affect none of the statutory holidays in 2024 will affect this class. But I just want to remind you, especially if you're not from Ontario, to take a look at the college calendar and just make sure that you observe the calendar, any stat holidays. Reminder that engagement week begins October 21st, so we will not have classes that week. And the final point related to attendance is related to my own attendance. I'll actually be absent not present for 5 classes this semester. So September 6th, so today, the 13th, and then at the end of the semester, so November 29th, 6th, and 13th. I will be in New Zealand at that time, and with the time change, I will actually be able to deliver live classes. That said, I am working on getting some really great guest speakers, and I will hold them all over till the end of the year when I'm not going to be in class. So then we can at least get some different voices and sort of take advantage of the fact that we're going to be on Zoom for those last few classes. More housekeeping, again, related to COVID, but not necessarily COVID. If you're sick, if you're going to miss a class, just let me know. There's no mandatory masking, there's no screening. All of those COVID protocols, of course, are in the past, I hope. But follow whatever guidelines with regard to any illness. And obviously, if you're sick, even if it's just a cold, please don't come in and infect all of your colleagues. Let me know, especially if it's going to have an impact on any of your, any material that has a deadline. And preferably you can get someone to take notes for you, but let me know. I have been known to record classes just with an audio recorder. So I can do that as well. And I always share all of my PowerPoints, which include, excuse me, I don't have speakers when I speak. I don't have speakers notes. I just go from the point forms on the PowerPoint. So I can't give you my notes, but I can give you my PowerPoint. More housekeeping. And again, you might have had a lot of this in other classes, but the college does offer a lot of support. So for example, if your name is not officially on the course list, check with enrollment services. If you're having any issues, reach out to Centennial Access to Student Services. So that's if you're related to anything as an international student, if you're having timetabling issues, if you're having any academic issues, accommodations, etc. That's always a good first place to start. Now, I have not confirmed that Marianne Scipione is the success advisor for this year, but I've put her name in there anyway. If she's not, she will certainly steer you in the right direction. And if you require an academic accommodation, reach out to the Center for Accessible Learning and Counseling Services, also known as CALCS. They will get you the letter that you need that will be sent to all of your instructors. Now, that said, that tends to take a long time. And your first assignment, maybe your first 2 assignments, will come in before that official letter comes in from CALCS. So please let me know and let any of your other instructors know. You don't have to let me know what the accommodation is, but you have to let me know what you're negotiating with CALCS. And that is usually, for example, if it's a written test, you get an extra 20% time to write it, or if it's a submitted assignment, that you would get an extra day or 2, whatever it is. So please just reach out. And again, you don't have to divulge anything personal to me, but I do want to ensure that you're not going to be losing marks for submitting anything late. And we'll go through all of the assignments. I'll go through all of the assignments shortly. And coming to the end of the housekeeping, this is one of the things I like to start every class with what I call the toolkit. And this is, you don't literally need to go out and buy the things that I tell you, that you might want to add to your toolkit. But what these things are is a book of the week, usually like a tool, like literally a tool for the week. Because I know that, you are going to be building up your, in my case, I'm a registrar, so I have a condition report kit. So whatever it is, and you can start slow. You can put these things on your Christmas list or your birthday wish list or your Amazon wish list. So little tools. So I'm going to go through some of those, and I'm going to give them, I usually follow the theme of the lecture, but for the tool, the actual pieces of equipment that I'm suggesting to you, they're all small personal pieces that you will buy, not big expensive pieces. those I'm putting in priority order. I'll also let you know an organization of the week, so you can start to subscribe to websites or journals or that kind of thing, and just so you have that language so that you can start looking for certain organizations that have interesting topics for you. Everyone has, social media presence, everyone has websites. Most of them have all sorts of free resources. So that'll be a useful link as well. I also like to include something more recent, something a little more, I don't want to say cutting edge, but not a textbook, nothing that's sort of carved in stone and was published 10 years ago, or while you were still in kindergarten. So usually in that genre, podcasts I tend to recommend. Sometimes TED Talks, sometimes it's just a video of a museum doing a cool thing. So again, these are not mandatory. You don't have to sit and listen to a podcast that I recommend, but I looked at the class list and I see that there's a lot of you coming from afar. So while you're on that GO train or whatever it is you're taking to get into the city, why not listen to a podcast about insurance? Really a lot more interesting than it sounds. And finally, the other area that I will recommend is a retailer or a supplier, because I realize that once you get out in the wild, you might not know, oh, where do I get acid-free, lignin-free buffered paper? It's not the kind of thing you can usually buy on Amazon or at Canadian Tire. So I will make a list of recommendations for retailers and suppliers that you're going to be interested in. Sometimes it's appraisers, sometimes it's a place where you can buy, acid-free materials or, museum or archival materials. So it's just, even if you choose not to use those vendors, it'll give you the languages you need to find what you're looking for. So this is one of those things. And every guest speaker that I have, I ask them if they can populate the toolkit. So, course overview. So again, at the beginning of every class, I'm going to start with this matrix that shows the course overview of where we're going. I will keep previous weeks on there so we can see where we've been. It helps, it'll help remind you of where we're at, not only in the program, but if you've missed a class, you can look back and say, I missed the class on provenance and cataloging. So it'll help you as well. So I'm going to go through the course overview right now. So today I'm just going to go through the course overview. I'm going to go through the assignments. So I'm going to go through all of that. I'm going to explain to you who I am and why I have the authority to teach you. And then I'm just going to talk a little bit about ethics and how that guides what we do, how we're in a position of trust as museum professionals, and why ethics are so important. And so there will be some documents that will be linked to eCentennial related to ethics. So the CMA, so the Canadian Museum Association, and ICOM, the International Council of Museums. There's other ethics documents, the AAM, the American Alliance of Museums, formerly the American Association of Museums. So there's a number of different ethics documents. They're all largely the same. They'll differ in specifics that are jurisdictionally specific. So speaking of jurisdictional specificity, our first class next week, when we really dive into things, is governing policies and legal framework. Now, I've put this down for the next two classes for September 13th and 20th, so weeks 2 and 3. Now, I actually hope to be able to get through it, if not completely in 1 week, then maybe just a little bit of overflow. And I start this, so my approach in teaching is to start big and then to slowly, well, not slowly, but to start big with these governing policies. And then that's the framework that's going to guide everything we do. So ethics inform the framework, and then the framework informs everything that we do. So I'm going to start with international legislation and work my way right down to institutional policy. And so, like I said, I'm going to try to compress that a little bit because there are going to be some group presentations happening. And so, so on week 3, I might get into acquisitions and accessioning. I've set aside September 24 for group presentations. It depends on how you sign up for things. Again, I'm going to be really flexible. I'm going to get into the assignments in a little bit, but there are group presentations that I anticipate will be sort of over 3 weeks. And that is going to depend a lot on your schedules. I haven't seen when you've got other things due. So if it turns out that all of your other instructors have something due on 1 week, then I will be flexible and you guys can all do your presentations in 1 week or 2. Anyway, my point to that is once we review the calendar and see when everything else is due, that's going to inform how we pick a date for group presentations. Again, I'm going to go through how that presentation is going to work, how you choose topics, how you choose group members. That will be coming up. Week 5, we're going to look at acquisitions and accessioning. So when I say acquisitions, I'm talking about how things come into a museum collection. It's something that I'm really passionate about because that is actually my day job. I'm the registrar for acquisitions and collections records at the ROM. So I'm really passionate about it. And honestly, I think that when you're building a collection, you're doing it in perpetuity for the future, for people of Ontario, in my case, because I work for a provincial institution, but you're just doing this for the future of humanity. It's kind of a big burden when you think about it. So anyway, I get passionate about it, as you can tell. And so through acquisitions, so how something comes into the collection, basically how you acquire it, whether you purchase it or whether you are gifted it, whether it's a bequest from an estate, and then how when it's accessioned, that's when it becomes a museum object. And then once it's accessioned, that's when all of the detailed research on provenance, all the detailed cataloging happens. So we're going to look at that the following week. Once you own all of these objects, then you can do a lot of different things with them. One of the things you can do is lend them out to other museums, such as why I'm in Chicago right now. We've lent all of these objects to the Field Museum. And so right now I've got a guest lecturer scheduled to come in. So as I said, I'm the registrar for acquisitions. So I'm going to bring in one of the registrars for loans. And she also happens to be a copyright specialist. So I'm going to kill 2 birds with 1 stone in that guest lecture. Then after all of this heavy content, you guys get a week off. No classes, no worries. And then we're going to jump right in. So loans, there's a natural segue into exhibitions. So exhibitions both come and go. So you can have incoming exhibitions. So right now at the ROM, we have quilts and we have, what else do we have? We've got a couple going on right now. We've got quilts. What do we have in the gallery? Oh, cats. We've got the cats exhibition. That's our big exhibition that's come in on loan. Quilts is homegrown. We're going to get into all of this, so don't worry. And then we have a sensory exhibition, one of those that has smells and sounds and immersive exhibitions. Anyway, so within that context of exhibitions, I'm including logistics because you might stand there and look at these, at the cats exhibition, these diving impalas, these huge cats, and just say, how the heck did they get that here? How was it packed? How was it shipped? Aren't these endangered species? Who made the mount? Is there a mount? All of that kind of thing. So we're going to look at logistics there. I may bring in a guest lecturer from one of the big logistics companies. So I brought her in the past. So watch that space. So again, this all flows. So week 9, so you've got this exhibition with all these fabulous things. You've got millions of dollars worth of art and artifacts and specimens moving around. How do you insure it? Who insures it? Is it possible? How do you even put a value on these objects? So we're going to move into insurance and indemnity, which is a type of insurance. So that is week number 9. And again, following insurance, we look at risk management and emergency preparedness, because how do you mitigate against any of those factors that may cause an insurance claim? So as you know from your own personal insurance, you don't want to claim because your premiums go up. And when you're insuring hundreds of millions of dollars even the smallest claim will cause your premiums to go up. And also, this stuff is irreplaceable, so you really don't want anything to happen to it. Again, I will likely bring in an expert in risk management and emergency preparedness. One of my colleagues that I worked with at the Aga Khan Museum is actually doing her PhD right now in museum emergency preparedness and risk management. So I'll have her come in for a lecture for that. So this class may actually move a little bit later in the year, just to take advantage of the fact that I'm going to be in New Zealand. So if I'm doing a Zoom class anyway, may as well get a guest lecturer in on Zoom. We're going to also look at, there's a bit of a non sequitur here, going into collections management technologies. So how we manage all of the information about collections. Because if you can't find an object unless you're wandering up and down storage, it's like going into a library without a library catalog. Museums are the same. And so you really have to know where everything is, and museum collections information technology is really, really huge. It's another one of my personal projects, personal passions. So I'm going to bring in the ROM's manager of museum collections information for a guest lecture there. And I've also reached out, I don't want to spoil it, but I've reached out to the supplier for the collection software that we use at the ROM and asked them if they can set up a test, sort of a sandbox environment for my class. So hopefully, I reached out to them months ago. So hopefully they can come up with something soon. So after collections management technologies, we're going to move into, on week 12, repatriation, deaccession, and disposal. So that is the corollary to accessioning and acquisitions. And so that's an interesting topic. I look forward to discussing that with you guys. Week 13 is always a class that I'm never comfortable as, white settler chick, first generation Canadian. I'm not very comfortable talking about. But I will be bringing in a guest lecturer on this. And in the past, I've had the curators speak about this. I've had the deputy director for collections who wrote our repatriation policy and our human remains repatriation policy. But this year, I think I'm actually going to take a different approach and actually bring in the collections manager who looks after collections and has to deal with, when I say deal with, that came out wrong, who interfaces with communities for access to the collections. And in her case, she's also a white settler chick, how she approaches it and how I think it'll be a most informative class, because it may be where you're coming from if you're not Indigenous, whether it's Canadian Indigenous or whatever area of museum you end up working in. And if it's an area, if you're responsible for material that's not your culture, and those materials are of ancestral or sacred nature, I think that my colleague Tracy would have a lot to offer, and there'd be a lot of takeaways for you there. And our final class is critical issues in collections management. So so that is just what it sounds like, the future of museums, and how, when you think of museums and our how we're situated in the world, and we're not immune to environmental disasters, climate disasters, economic disasters, political climate, all of these things have an impact on museums. And science is always changing. So the way we approach things in terms of an insular approach changes as well. So it's just looking at all of those things. Last year, I had a guest lecturer come in to talk about museum sustainability. And again, she's a sustainability expert working in the museum sector, but through a private company. And so again, a lot of great value came out of that talk. So that is the course overview, just in terms of what we're going to get through. Every week in East Centennial, there will be the information, sort of a little summary of what the class is about, what the readings are, and I'm going to get into what our textbook is in a minute. So what those readings are, links to any other readings, if I can find them, or PDFs. And so that's what we're looking at. Sorry, I'm just getting over a cold. This is not my normal voice. Excuse me. So that is the class overview. Assignments. This is what you've all been waiting for. And I'm going to go into more detail about each assignment, but I'm going to give you just the overview right now and the due date. So the first assignment is actually about you. It is a video introduction. Again, I'm going to go into some detail in a little bit, what I expect in that video. But it's due fairly early. It's due on September 14th, and it's worth 10% of your final grade. Your next assignment is a group seminar presentation, and that's worth 25% of your grade. And that I've got it marked on here as due September 27th, but in the course overview, I have it September 27th, October 4th, and 11th. So I'm anticipating, I was thinking 2 or 3 presentations per class. But as I mentioned earlier, I do have, I'm open. I've got a lot of flexibility built into that. So that is the group seminar presentation. The next assignment, honestly, I didn't feel it's too much to make it 2 assignments for you, because it's a big assignment. And I couldn't decide which of these 2 assignments to give you. So I'm actually giving you the choice. I'm going to go into some detail about both of those in a little bit, but one is about acquisitions and one is about loans. So the amount of work in both is approximately equal. I don't think one is more difficult than the other. They're just very different approaches to collections management. So one is building a collection, and then one is engaging that collection with other stakeholders outside your institution. So I think they're both great fun assignments. And as I said, I couldn't choose, so I'm going to make you. And that is due on November 16th. There is flexibility in this. I can't make anything due sooner that I put in the syllabus, but I can make it due later. So if you've got 5 other assignments due that week, please tell me. And I hope someone will share with me your outline of what's due in all of your other classes. We also have a final test, which is worth 25% of your final grade. That's on November 30th. That will be, again, I'm going to go into some detail, but that is a virtual test. You can do that online. You don't have to come in to class. It's essentially an open book test. So that is on November 30th. And then the final assignment is in some ways a corollary to the initial assignment. So one is you're coming in fresh face, you've got these ideas of the museum community and what you're going to bring to it, and how it's going to just be wonderful and fabulous. And then at the end, after you've had an entire semester of learning from some of the top experts in their field, I want you to say, okay, that's great, but these are areas we can improve. I'm going to go into detail on the critical issues assignment as well, but it's a reflection. So you'll notice that the first assignment and the last assignment are and I'll explain what that means in a little bit. But they're worth 10%, which is enough. It's the difference between an A and a B if you don't submit it, but they're quite short assignments, so they're worth a little bit less. So this is not really part of the toolkit that I mentioned earlier. This is the textbook for class. It's called Museum Registration Methods. This is the 6th edition. If you can find a used version of the 5th edition, that's fine. I actually put the page numbers for both the 5th and the 6th edition. So, so do feel free to pick up a used version. It's an expensive textbook, so hopefully you can get a copy through the library or through some other online source. But it is a real critical textbook for collections management, absolutely. And I also find it useful, even if you say you want to go into project management, or if you want to go into exhibit design, or marketing. There's enough in this book. If you are going to have only one museum textbook, I think this is a really good one, because if you're going to go into marketing, for example, this book has sections on copyright and the way you can use objects and the way you can use contemporary art and that kind of thing. If you're going to go into project management, this textbook will walk you through how to timetable and budget for an exhibition. Essentially, it gives you the big steps. So if you're going to go into preparators or mount making, it goes into all of that. It goes into conservation and what environmental requirements are. So there's a lot in this textbook, even though the title is Museum Registration Methods. It goes into a lot. So I do encourage you to get it. Okay, here's where I'm going to be totally brutally honest. If you don't, you're not going to fail the course. You'll be missing out on a lot, but I understand it's $100 textbook. So I'll ask the library, get a copy of it. I know through U of T, there is an electronic copy that's available. And at the ROM, we do have a reading room in our library. And this is one of the reference books that you can go in and request. You can't just go in and request it and have them pull it out for you immediately, but you can reach out and have a request made. Okay. So I've talked an awful lot, and I realized I didn't really tell you who I am. So told you my name. My name's Stephanie Allen. You can see my postnominals are MMST, which means I have a Master of Museum Studies from U of T. I'm a registrar at the Royal Ontario Museum. And as I said earlier, the registrar for my specialty is acquisitions and collections information. And so I'm in the registration department, which is part of the collections care division. And I work at the ROM. And I've been at the ROM for about 25 years. Well, I started about 25 years ago, but I took, let me go into it. But I took a 5-year break and I went to another museum, which I'll tell you about in a second. So the ROM, for those of you who aren't from Ontario, and even if you are, you might not actually know, you might not know the museum. So it's on Bloor Street, right at the corner of Queen's Park and Bloor, or Avenue Road and Bloor, depends on which side of the street you're on. Avenue Road is one of those streets that changes names 3 times in a 2-kilometer stretch. So Avenue Road, Queen's Park, and University. It's all the same street. So that is the Royal Ontario Museum. I'm going to give you a little bit of history. The ROM was created through an act of the provincial legislature in 1912. And we are still an agency of the province of Ontario. So over 100 years later, we are still part of the province. The first building was opened in 1914. So the collection was able to build. The curators went on mad collecting sprees for those couple of years while the building was being built. Initially, the ROM was housed 5 separate museums: the Museum of Archaeology, Paleontology, Mineralogy, Zoology, and Geology. Now, there's evidence of this if you go into the old part of the building and you look over, like if you're in the rotunda and you look up, it's some of the galleries that go around the rotunda. That's the rotunda has the gold ceiling just off of Queen's Park. And you can see evidence of these old names. And honestly, you can actually see evidence of it when you're working at the ROM, because there's a lot of what we call silos. And a lot of it is just based on the origin of the ROM. So for over 100 years, these individual they're now departments within the museum, were able to function independent of one another. So that was the ROM up until the Great Depression. Then during the Great Depression, there were a lot of, for anyone who studied Canadian history, that there were a lot of sort of make work projects a lot of civic projects that were funded by the government that happened throughout that time. And the ROM expansion was one of those. And that opened in 1933. And that expansion is actually the Queen's Park building. If you were to look at the ROM before the Crystal, it's in the shape of an H. So the western part is the original building. The eastern part of the H is the new building, the 1933 building, and then they were joined in the middle to make an H, and then the Crystal was added on in 2000. Okay, so in 1955, the museums were organized as a single body, although, like I said, there is a legacy. 1964, the McLaughlin Planetarium was built, so everyone knows the planetarium. Now, the ROM was actually born as part of U of T. All of the curators were cross-appointed with the University of Toronto. So in 1968, there was an amicable divorce with U of T, and the ROM became its own separate entity. Now, those ties with U of T still exist. Our curators are still cross-appointed. A lot of them are actually lecturers at U of T, so there was a lot of cross-appointment and still a very strong relationship with U of T. In 1978, there was another addition, which was the Curatorial Center and the Terrace Galleries, and they were completed in the early 80s. You might think, the Terrace Galleries, what are they? Well, they're gone. They were replaced in 2007 by what we now know as the Crystal, and that's that. I just have to be careful what I say. So they were replaced by the Crystal. And I'm going to turn on a light. Staying in a hotel, so I'm not sure. Okay. ROM collections. So the ROM is the 5th largest museum in North America. Now, I've got here 13 million objects over 19 collecting areas. The current number puts that at 16 million objects over 19 collecting areas. That includes decorative arts, fine arts, archaeology, archives, life sciences, and earth sciences. Now, 16 million objects sounds incredibly huge, and it is. But the reality is probably about 15 million of those objects are actually specimens in the natural history department. So a jar of bugs. It's my favorite example. The entomology people, they don't like it when I say that. But anyway, so there's probably the vast majority of that is probably 14.5 million of those are natural history specimens. So how do we acquire 16 million objects and specimens? How does that collection get built? Well, as I said, it's kind of one of my passions is collection building. And the primary way that we build the collection today are through gift. So donors give us their family objects or whatever they've collected over their lifetime. They either give it to us or they bequeath it to us in their will. The other thing that we do is we have certain restricted funds for purchases. So curators will go through what's called a peer review process and make strategic acquisitions. And then finally, we collect things through what's known as field collecting. That's primarily the natural history department as well. Our archaeology team is not permitted, nor would they actually remove cultural objects from sites outside of Ontario. Historically, that was done, but it's no longer done. So, but I say outside of Ontario because the ROM is actually a repository for Ontario archaeology. Now, we don't have any Ontario archaeologists working in the field, but other accredited archaeologists can deposit their material at the ROM, and we will hold it in perpetuity. In terms of numbers of acquisitions that we do, we look at probably about 175 a year on the art and culture side. And then the science collections, they do their own, depends on how their field work is working. in a number of different factors. Of course, during COVID, they didn't collect at all. So that number just depends. If it's a really good year and the entomologists go out, they don't go out every year. So that number is harder to determine. But generally, registration services the whole museum, but the art and culture department is by far the one that we serve most often. In my past, so as I said, I started in the museum world about 25 years ago at the ROM, and then the Aga Khan Museum was opening up and they needed a registrar, and I thought, I need a challenge. This is amazing, brand new museum. So I went from the oldest, largest museum in Canada to the newest and well, not smallest, but the newest museum in Canada. So it was this incredible opportunity to contrast the two. I was able to take learnings from the ROM and how to do things better without 100 years of baggage and apply it to the Aga Khan Museum. So it was a brilliant opportunity. I really enjoyed my time at the Aga Khan Museum. And it was interesting because we went it was a private collection owned by His Highness the Aga Khan, who is the spiritual leader of the Ismaili Muslims. And he had this fabulous collection of art related mainly to the Islamic world. And that pretty much encompasses the whole world. So it was a very, very curated collection that was acquired. Yeah, it was acquired a lot through His Highness had art advisors providing all sorts of advice. So so it became this fabulous collection of art that he owned privately, and I can tell you guys some stories about how he wanted to just take the painting off the wall and put it in his private jet and just send it over to Toronto because we needed it for an exhibition. And just trying to arrange customs clearance for a private jet. Was some really interesting stories on how the transformation from a private collection housed mainly in Switzerland, which is why you see the picture of the Swiss flag, housed mainly in Switzerland, and then how it came to Toronto. So again, I've got lots of stories to talk about there, and lots of lessons learned. So I spent a lot of time in Switzerland, primarily in Geneva at an area known as the Port Franc, which is a free port. So you might hear of Switzerland, Geneva in particular, being a clearinghouse for things like art, gold, wine, like all sorts of really rare and expensive things. And Freeport is a political state. It's sort of like a no man's land where you can bring something in, it can be held indefinitely, and you don't pay import duties on it. It doesn't leave the Freeport. It stays in the Freeport, but you can have an art collection there. So you can see in these pictures, all of the boxes in the background. That's all art collection. So, and then you're able to export it. So when we exported from the Freeport, it was as if it was never in Switzerland because it was only in Switzerland, in like on the sort of on the surface of Switzerland. It never actually administratively entered the country of Switzerland. So Swiss taxes were never paid on that collection. So it's interesting. It's a very interesting. There's a few free ports around the world. So anyway, we went over there managing a collections management. I was a collections manager for a collection that didn't even exist in the country that I was in. So we would go over with photographers and shoot all of the photography because we had to have a catalog ready for the day the museum opened. So we had to do all sorts of things like that. So I was doing condition reporting, insurance assessments. The mount makers came over and the designers, like it was like a revolving door flying back and forth to Switzerland to try to open a museum because the building was still being constructed. So we couldn't bring the collection over. So yes, so the building was being constructed. That picture of me in the top corner was my first week of work at the Aga Khan Museum. So this is the state of the building when I first started. For those of you who are familiar with the AKM, that staircase you see, that is the blue staircase. So obviously this is before all the finishing surfaces were put in, but that is what the staircase looked like back in early 2012. So yeah, so this was the museum when I started. And then I was able to fit out the collection so you can see storage cabinets are going in. So the one bank is along the back wall there, that picture at the top. And you can see the rolling racks are in for additional cabinets that were eventually put in. You can see in some of these other pictures, the bottom right-hand corner is that is actually what became the restaurant. Those panels, that picture was taken in England where the conservation was happening, but those panels ended up going into the restaurant. Um, the picture of me in the middle with the two birds is, they were two of my favorite objects, these metal birds. And that is, I was just doing condition reporting and cataloging so that I could provide that information to the designers, really detailed dimensions and that kind of thing. And then the bottom left-hand corner is the collection moving to Toronto. That's that was literally the first truckload that came in of art. So yeah, that is the Aga Khan Museum was super interesting in terms of getting everything ready. And then this slide just shows the installation. This was us installing, like you can see the mounts there at the top. We're testing things out for size, we're condition reporting, we're doing really amazing photography on manuscripts. That is a custom design, that machine. Got video of it. It's super cool. And there I am on the bottom right-hand corner, actually installing pieces. So that's the Aga Khan Museum installation. It was ready to go. Opening day, you can see Stephen Harper was the prime minister at the time, and he was confused by something, and we were all having a laugh at his expense. So you can see in this picture, Prince Amin is His Highness the Aga Khan's brother. You can see the museum director. Anyway, I was stationed at this particular case to talk to Stephen Harper about all of the federal cooperation that we went through with this particular piece. And I'm happy to go into that if anyone is interested in that kind of thing. Well, in fact, we're going to touch on it in the first lecture about legislation. So what is collections management? This is going to be just a romp through collections management because we are going to spend the next 14 weeks diving in. So initially, when you think about museum collections management functions, this is kind of the laundry list. And it's the list, the course list, like the weekly topics, kind of follow this pattern. So we acquire things or we collect things. We register them, so we make a record of them. We're responsible for their health and well-being, so the conservation and the preservation of those objects. We're responsible for the furthering knowledge about these objects. So whether that's through provenance or cataloging, we document them through photographs and other types of documentary record keeping. We put them on display and we exhibit them. Sometimes we lend them. So in order to do that, we have to pack them, we have to handle them. Then we can lend them, and through the course of lending objects, we have to figure out how we're going to ship them. When they're not going out to other museums for loan, we have to figure, and they're not on display, we have to figure out how to store them. Once we start storing things, we have to manage the inventory on those. Once there's an inventory, we need to make sure that we have appropriate security in place. And that security is the physical well-being of the objects, in terms of locked cases and locked rooms, but it's also the environmental requirements for those pieces. We have to insure them. So we need to know what the value of these objects is. Can they have a monetary value? And if not, how do you come up with a monetary value? But in order to come up with a value, you need to know that they're authentic. And then we need to be able to track locations and record those locations. I already mentioned insure. And sometimes we need to remove objects from your collection or to dispose is the word we use, which I realize sounds a little harsh. but that's the term. And so this is collections management in a nutshell. And we're going to dive into we're going to dive into pretty much all of this over the next 14 weeks. So collections management is a number of different areas that come together to do all of those functions. If you're in a smaller museum, it might just be one person. If you're in a museum like me at the ROM, these functions are managed by, 6 different departments. Any one acquisition will go through 10 hands before it gets to me. So depending on the kind of institution that you're at, the functions will be the same. It's just how many hats is the person who's doing it wearing? Is it one person wearing all the hats, or is it just a small cog in a big wheel? So I'm coming at this through the lens of registration because that is what my training is and my specialty is. And that's what I'm teaching you. I think it's a fundamental collections management. I think it's a really good central collections management function. And it's one that sort of reaches into everything. And where I either don't have the skill, that doesn't sound right, that doesn't sound confident, but where there's someone who's better able to speak to certain topics, I'll bring them in. But know that in a small museum like the Aga Khan Museum, it was me doing it all. At the ROM, I've got, like I say, 10 people I can count on to do various different things. Well, there's more than 10 people at the ROM, but any one task. So registration. What is registration? No, we don't register kids for summer camps, in spite of what the name sounds like. So registration at the ROM is very similar to registration in big museums all over the world. We are primarily responsible for what we call our source files. So this is the documentation that the museum owns, the stuff that the museum has the legal right and authority to exhibit, to conserve, to photograph. So those documents could be receipts of sale, they could be copyright agreements, they could be exhibition agreements or loan contracts. There could be all sorts of different documentation that proves that your institution has the right to have the custody and the right to act on behalf of those works. And those rights will vary. Obviously, if we've borrowed something, our rights are restricted to what's in that loan agreement. Just because we've borrowed it, we have the right to have it on our premises and to show the piece, but it doesn't mean we can go and do conservation on it or something. So we are the holders of all the documentation. We work really closely in collaboration with curatorial departments. So whether that's in acquisitions or loans, and we also work closely with the federal government. We acquire a lot of things that are what's known as certification. They're certified as cultural property. You might hear the term national treasure. That's loosely can be described as cultural property. Excuse me. We also do negotiate copyright agreements for acquisitions and loans, which is particularly important for contemporary works. We also do physical examinations and condition reporting of all ROM loan objects, as well as incoming loan objects and exhibitions. In fact, that's what I'm doing here in Chicago. Our material is here. We're taking it down off of display in Chicago. It's been on display for almost a year. And I'm just checking it to make sure that the objects are fine, that we don't need to make an insurance claim. And so far, day one, everything is fine. And I don't anticipate any problems. But some things just through being exposed, they might need a new mount, they might be dusty. So not everything is disastrous. Sometimes it's just what you need to do to care for your collection. So yeah, we need to tweak a mount or something like that. Registrars also act as the central contact with lending institutions, and we negotiate contracts, insurance coverage, indemnity, immunity from seizure. That sounds really scary. It's interesting, and we're going to go into that. But we do that for all incoming loan objects. We also liaise with curators and senior management and the board, donors and outside lenders and borrowers to ensure that all those transactions that I mentioned, loans, acquisitions, exhibitions, all happen smoothly. We monitor and update the collections database. We record and maintain all the primary and original contractual documentation, transfer of title documents, insurance, all of that stuff. And we protect the museum's interest and mitigate risks for objects at the museum. So my cocktail party one-liner, or my elevator pitch, is that any object that comes into or goes out of the museum comes through registration. We look after it legally through whatever documentation, whether it's a loan agreement or a deed of gift or some sort of transfer of title. We look after it administratively, so where it is in the building, we track its location in the database, we make sure that it's got insurance, and we look after it physically. So when it comes in, that's when we do that condition report. So it's essentially like, you know, when you rent a car and you walk around the car and you make a note of any scratches, dents, or dings, that's essentially what we do with objects as they come in or go out. So that's my cocktail party one-liner. That might help you think of what registration does. There's a lot of other people at that cocktail party, but that is our role as things come and go, kind of the gatekeepers. Just to give you a sense of the ROM org chart. Now this one is it's out of date, it's 2017. We don't actually do org charts anymore. Everything is all through this virtual system. So I haven't actually seen a printed org chart. It's not really much different. The director is at the very, very top, and I'm gonna watch for the red button. That is my manager there. So that is the division that I am in, reporting to the Deputy Director of Collections and Research. And then here's a more detailed version of that. We now actually have another senior manager right underneath the Deputy Director of Collections and Research, and her title is the Chief of Collections Care. So it's more of a collections care focus, which I really like, actually. I think it's important that we put collections care first. I'm just going to walk through a couple of transactions that we've done that are kind of interesting. So this one here is a loan that we did of a Marie Antoinette dress. So in 1925, we purchased this dress, which was purported to have belonged to Marie Antoinette of France. You can see on the left, there's the receipt that Charles Corelli, you've probably heard his name. He's got a historic plaque around the museum. He's considered the founding father of the ROM. So in 1925, he purchased this dress for, looks like, 75 pounds from Christie's in London. So this is the kind of documentation we have in our file. So this document proves that we own this dress. Now you have to take it on faith that the French silk dress, as described here, is the dress that we're talking about. And you can see reference to a catalog number, and this is all part of that file. So this is the kind of documentation that we have. And so we lent this dress to the Palace of Versailles back, I mean, this was a number of years ago, but we lent it to the Palace of Versailles. This is just a copy of the loan agreement from that time. I've redacted it, so it's not, doesn't give away values or any top secret information. But that is the kind of documentation that we create. We would need to have an export permit for this. Again, we're going to go into export permits, even though it's a French piece. It's been in Canada for more than 50 years, so we need to get an export permit for it. It's over a certain dollar value. So this is the condition report that I mentioned. In this case, we've marked up a photograph just showing, where all of the imperfections are. And it goes with a written document that is countersigned by the borrower. So they will go over this piece and they will countersign it as well. Again, that's what I'm working on right now in Chicago. And this is really typical. So I've just put in some photographs here for an exhibition where we've just got binders of condition reports, and you're literally working on hundreds of pieces. I think the show I'm working on now is a couple hundred pieces. So that's a segue into exhibitions. We're a big team player in exhibitions. Registration plays a really important role. We're responsible for the contracts. We're responsible for receiving the objects and their condition report. Sometimes we act as couriers, art couriers. So again, it's kind of what I'm doing now, where you accompany the artworks. We're responsible for indemnification or insurance. We're going to go into a lot of detail about the difference between insurance and indemnity, but essentially it's the same as financial coverage for the collection. For things like immunity from seizure, like when we lent that Marie Antoinette dress to France, the French government might say, hey, this is French cultural property. Marie Antoinette was so important to the people of France that we're not going to send this back. And so immunity from seizure is a judicial guarantee from a jurisdictional, court, or in Ontario, it's the provincial legislature that guarantees that that piece will be returned to the lending institution, and there you can fight it out. So anyway, that's what immunity from seizure is all about. But another big part of exhibitions, depending on what the exhibition is copyright. So anytime there's the Copyright Act in Canada allows, doesn't allow, it requires artists give permission for their works to be used. And in Canada, they are also entitled to financial compensation for that display of that work. Exhibitions and loans require transportation. So I just thought this was a cool transportation shot. I've also done some video walkthrough of the Field Museum deinstall, so you can see lots of crates and that kind of thing. And I've done a little mini interview with the project manager who talks a little bit about transportation. So that information is going to be coming up. At the ROM, the registrar doesn't actually do the packing itself. That's done by a different department. That's preparators at the ROM. But when I was at the Aga Khan Museum, I was responsible for that. And this is just a shot of crates at the AKM. This was part of an exhibition. And just to give you some sense of the scale, in the back, sort of on the right-hand side, just behind one of the crates, you see the top of a door, the gray. That's the top of a door. So that just gives you a sense of some of the sizes of some of the crates. And then there's some details on crates, and we're going to go into this when we talk about logistics, but just fun facts. So by looking at the crate on the bottom, I can see that that crate was made in Switzerland and that it was heat treated. So the Canada Food Inspection Agency and its counterpart across the world, every country has its own equivalent, says you can't risk bringing in vermin into Canada. So all crate material has to be treated for pests. So by looking at this this stamp, I can see CH is Switzerland and HT is heat treated. So I can just tell by looking at that crate. And then the picture on the other side is just showing that that crate has not been dropped. It has not hit a pressure of whatever the shock watch is set to. So there's just different things you can do. I just thought I'd throw that in there just as a little sneak peek into some behind the scenes. And this is some of the crate material, some of the crating stuff at the Aga Khan Museum, just as we were unpacking the collection. So this is not a loan. This is moving the entire collection. Ordinarily, you wouldn't have crates this huge. But I designed these crates myself to take full advantage of the interior of a cargo plane. And then we essentially Tetrised all these little interior boxes. So you can see that in the photograph on the right. And so that way we were able to just make everything fit and not waste any space and not waste any extra crates. So these crates are the size of a downtown Toronto condo. I mean, you can see this, these people. They're actually on the tall side of average. Like Curtis and Yelena are the two in the pictures, and Susan on the bottom left. But you can see the storage on the bottom left. Those racks have been populated. Remember, we saw the tracks. Anyway, so now the racks are in and we're moving the objects in. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about ethics. There's a couple of ethics documents that are attached to eCentennial, but The importance of ethics in what we do, because we are guardians, we are trustees of our collections for, as I said, for the future. So so here's a quote from the CMA ethics guidelines that I really liked, and it was, ethics are based upon the underlying values of honesty, fairness, respect, excellence, and accountability. Museum ethics represent more than the avoidance of contractual or legal liability or the particulars of a code of conduct. They are a framework of personal and institutional obligations and standards which govern the conduct of all members of the museum community at all times. So I really like that, because it's not just about, is it legal? Can we get away with it? Is it wrong? Um, Is it wrong or is it illegal? I mean, those are different questions. So it's the same with museum ethics. So I encourage you to read the ethics document that will most closely, I'm presuming that everyone here is either Canadian or, read the CMA guidelines, read the ICOM guidelines. If you're not a Canadian, if you're one of our international students, then seek out the ethics documents that govern your own jurisdictional museums. So again, I like this from the CMA. Both museums and museum workers have duties, responsibilities, and opportunities, and from time to time, they encounter ethical dilemmas and conflicts, which must be resolved in a balanced manner, considering both the needs of the institution and the broader public interest. So you are representing that public interest as well as the institution. So you're in this position where you're kind of bridging those two needs. The CMA ethics guidelines are intended to promote a climate of integrity by affirming the values of the museum community, to assist individuals who must make and act upon decisions of an ethical nature, and provide the public with some insight as to what they might expect from museums as individuals associated with them. So, for example, we're not going to sell off the collection to pay for the renovation. That's just something that, although not technically illegal, it's not something that museums would do. That said, actually, there was a little bit of gray area during COVID where museums faced closures, not Canadian museums. This was more of an issue in the US, where museums faced closures and were able to strategically deaccession parts of their collection in order to stave off closure because of the pandemic. But those were crazy times. For some reason, my screen is not refreshing the way it should. The ethics guidelines, where they include the specific regional sort of guidelines, this is where it comes into respect for traditional customs. So the CMA guidelines say that museums should respect the worldview of other cultures or communities, including oral history and traditional knowledge concerning culturally significant objects and and human osteological material. Information about these culturally sensitive objects may not be readily available, and this is my emphasis, it is the responsibility of museums to actively seek it out and to consult with knowledgeable members of appropriate communities before using the material in any way. So that's my emphasis, and I strongly encourage you to go back and just look at this document or this slide, or to find this page in the CMA guidelines, the ethics guidelines, and really just focus on it, let it sink in, let it figure out what it means. I look at this and I immediately look at it from sort of an Indigenous perspective, but it's not limited to that. And it puts the onus on the individual to seek out how best to work with these materials and with these communities. So I've referred to the ICOM Code of Ethics. So once again, ICOM is the International Council of Museums. So I've referred to the ICOM Code of Ethics, which is the International Council of Museums, and their code of ethics very similar. I've highlighted just basically a few pieces from Section 8 that relate specifically to collections management, and that is familiarity with relevant legislation, not just in your own jurisdiction, but wherever you're sending material or wherever you're collecting it from. So if you're collecting something from Bolivia, you better know that that piece can be legally exported from Bolivia. You better know what those requirements are on the cultural material from that area. You're also required to have professional responsibility and to just live up to that professional responsibility, as well as professional conduct. And the other thing that you need to be aware of, again, I put this, section 8.5, is the illicit market. So often people will say, well, it's not reported as stolen. Well, I think it's your responsibility to know that, if you're acquiring, I'm going to say, for example, Syrian archaeological material that has no provenance, that predates the current war in Syria, you have to ask yourself, wow, this is a really loud train. You have to ask yourself, is this looted? Is this likely to be looted? And so you just have to understand what that illicit market is. You have to know what those red flags are with certain dealers that fake provenance documents, all sorts of things. Depends on the kind of institution that you're in. But the responsibility is on you. Just because something isn't reported stolen doesn't mean it's not. And finally, everything we deal with is confidentiality. Everything from a registration perspective, whether it's the value of an object, whether it's the facility. So when we lent this show to Chicago, I had a copy of their facility. I know where all the security cameras are. I know how many security guards there are. I know how often they do their rounds. I know where all the entrance and exits are. I know the kind of security system they have. And every time you lend your objects to another museum, you are privy to that kind of information. So that is just, you just really have to have, zip that mouth. You cannot share any of that information. If it's your own collection, I know where all the lenders live. I had personal addresses of the donors. Some of our donors are I remember we acquired something from Nick Nurse, and there was a bit of a buzz because he was still the coach of the Raptors at the time, and it was quite a big deal. And it's like, well, I got his cell phone number here. So there are certain things that you're privy to. I know where all the valuable objects are in the museum. I know the dollar value. I know exactly where they are, on what shelf and in what room. So there's just all sorts of confidential information. A lot of that confidentiality may be about exhibition schedules or just other things that could potentially impact the museum's reputation. So it's not all just monetary or about donors or about security. There's all sorts of other impacts that confidentiality can have. And that is it. Okay, so that is everything that I have for this lecture. Now I'm going to go into the assignments.